They dumped me in a nursing home like yesterday's garbage. What they didn't know was that I wasn't finished yet. Before I tell you the whole story, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know where my sisters are tuning in from now. Let me take you back to the moment everything changed. The day they took me away, the sky was a dull, ugly gray, the kind that presses on your chest like bad news before it even arrives. I should have known something was off. Karen had called that morning, sounding sweet as Swedish sugar pie, saying she was coming over with David and Luke to help me organize some things. Help. I should have known better. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I used to braid their hair, help them with their math homework, serve birthday cake. I even set out for cups of coffee like it was some kind of family meeting. Silly me, I was wearing my pink sweater, the one George always said brought out the color in my cheeks. I remember adjusting my lipstick in the toaster's reflection. Funny, isn't it? I still wanted to look nice for my children. I still wanted them to love me. The door slammed harder than necessary. Karen walked in first, brisk and businesslike, wearing that tight expression she always had when she was lying. David followed, phone in hand, eyes glued to the screen. Luke came last, holding some papers. I didn't like the look of them. Mom, Karen started. We've been talking, that's how it always begins, isn't it? Right before they pull your world out from under you. She explained everything in the tone you'd use with a child, soft, patronizing. She said they'd found a wonderful place for me. A resort-style living facility in the hill country. Sounded like a damn spa commercial. I blinked, my heart pounding, trying to make sense of it. I'm not going anywhere, I said calmly. This is my home. Luke cleared his throat and slid the papers across the table. Mom, you've been forgetting things. We're just trying to protect you. Protect me? From what? My own life. I wanted to scream, to throw that stack of betrayal back in their faces. But instead, I stared at my hands. The same hands that packed their lunches, stitched their Halloween costumes, held them through fevers and nightmares. Hands that worked 2 jobs after George died just to keep this roof over our heads. You already signed the power of attorney papers, Karen said softly. That's when my knees buckled. I didn't remember signing anything. Yes, I'd been tired. Days blurred sometimes. I misplaced things occasionally. Nothing dangerous, just little slips. But I trusted them. They were my babies. I never thought they'd use that against me. Within an hour, my bags were packed. They didn't even let me choose which photo frames to take. Just one suitcase. My house, full of love and sweat and memories, was gone in an afternoon. The ride to the nursing home was quiet. David drove. Karen sat beside him, tapping on her phone. Luke sat with me in the back but never looked me in the eye. Mom, you'll love it there. They have bingo nights and movie screenings, he muttered. I wanted to laugh. Or slap him. I did neither. We pulled up to a beige complex tucked between a gas station and a dry cleaner. No trees, no garden, just pavement and beige walls. A woman in scrubs came out with a clipboard, smiling too hard. That first night, I cried like a child. I pressed my pillow over my face to muffle the sound. I didn't cry because of the room or the cold sheets or the tasteless food. I cried because they had stopped seeing me as a person. To them, I was an obstacle, a burden. But here's the thing, I'm not someone who stays down for long. It took a few weeks for the anger to settle. I stayed quiet and observed. I saw the staff kind but overworked. I saw the other residents ghosts in cardigans, silent partners in the waiting room of life. But I also saw something else. I saw Ruth. She was in the common area, playing poker with a nurse and cackling like a villain in an old western. You bet your lunch money on that hand, baby, she shouted, slapping down her cards. I smiled. It was the first time in weeks I'd really laughed. She noticed it immediately. You knew? I asked. She tilted her head. You've got that freshly betrayed by family look. I actually laughed. And just like that, Ruth pulled me right in, then came sweet as pie but sharp as a tack. She used to be a school librarian in Vermont. She noticed everything. Then Maxine showed up, tall and tough, with eyes that looked like they'd seen everything and lived to tell the story. Turned out she used to teach law at a community college before a fall messed up her hip. We started sitting together at meals, then at games, then late at night in the lounge, sipping tea and trading stories. One night, I told them everything about the betrayal, about my house. All of it. Maxine leaned back and raised an eyebrow. Did you sign over the deed? I shook my head. No, I think I still own it, legally. Ruth let out a long whistle. Honey, if that's true, you've got gold under your feet and fire in your hands. That's when it started, the spark of an idea, a tiny rebellion in a place built for surrender. I wasn't going to just sit there and rot. If they thought they'd thrown me away, they were about to learn exactly who they'd messed with. I was Eleanor Grace Miller, mother, widow, survivor, and I was about to set the world on fire. It all began in that drawer of my Oak Hills room. Senior living gave me just enough space for a twin bed, a dresser, and a narrow closet that smelled like antiseptic and peppermint gum. I'd unpacked my single suitcase in a sort of numb routine until I opened that last drawer and found it tucked in the corner. My old leather folio, the one I used to keep important papers in. My fingers trembled as I unzipped it. Inside was the original deed to my house, still in my name, still legal. No signature from Karen, no notary stamp, just mine. I sat hard on the bed, the papers shaking in my lap. All the buried emotions, shame, heartbreak, rage came crashing back. My children had planned to sell my house, not out of love, not out of concern, but for themselves. They wanted my home, probably to fix it up and flip it to some young couple for a profit. I clutched that deed like it was the last piece of me they hadn't stolen. And for the first time since George's funeral, I prayed. Not for strength, not for peace. I prayed for clarity, for a sign, and it came the next morning. Ruth barreled into the dining hall wearing her lavender sweater with rhinestone buttons. Guess who's back from her son's wedding? Maxine. And she's got stories. That's how Maxine rejoined our little circle. She'd been gone a week to attend her youngest son's wedding in Austin. And judging by the way she rolled her eyes while pouring her black coffee, it hadn't gone well. New wife's a Botox doll, she muttered. Wouldn't know a book if it hit her in her lip fillers. We laughed. But my mind was somewhere else. I waited until breakfast ended. Until the nurses got distracted by the resident trying to flush magazines down the toilet. And then I pulled Maxine aside. I need your help, I whispered, that afternoon. In the privacy of Maxine's room, because of course she had one. She always found a way. We spread the documents across her desk. She examined the deed, the copy of my will, and the medical PO I vaguely remembered signing after a bad fall last year. Right after Karen had shown up with Chinese food and an urgent form. You didn't sign over the title, Maxine confirmed, tapping her red nails against the page. They have control over your medical decisions, sure. But the house? Still yours. My heart thudded. Can they still sell it if they try and I catch it in time? No, but if they forge your signature. She trailed off. I clenched my jaw. Then I need to sell it first. She stared at me like I'd grown wings. You serious? I want to sell my house. Take the money and get out of here. I want to live before I die, Maxine. And then she did something I didn't expect. She smiled. I didn't answer her right away. The call ended with a promise. I told Emily I needed time. I said I wasn't ready. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped the phone into the Atlantic. Ruth had to take it from me and place it on the lounge chair while I just stood there frozen. Staring at the water, she sounded sincere. De whispered later that evening as we sat on the rooftop terrace of our guest house. The Lisbon sky stretched above us in shades of honey and blue. The sun was setting on another perfect day, and yet, the past had risen up to find me again, this time. The voice on the phone belonged to a child I once rocked to sleep. She's still one of them. Maxine said, firm as stone. Don't let a soft voice fool you, but I couldn't stop thinking about Emily. She had always been different, quiet, observant. When she was little, she followed me around the garden, pulling weeds and asking about every bird that landed on the fence. I'd kept her drawings and her crayon-colored letters. She was the only one who kept calling me until Karen finally cut me off from all the grandkids. She was 16 now, almost grown. Maybe old enough to see things clearly. Or maybe this was just another trick. Another setup. 2 days later, I got a text. A single photo. It was my old house, but almost unrecognizable. The porch was stripped bare. My rose bushes were gone. The sky blue shutters George and I painted one summer had been turned into a dull, lifeless beige. Under the picture, one message, they trashed it. I'm sorry. I stared at the photo for a long time. My throat tightened like someone had a fist around it. They hadn't just sold my house, they had gutted it. Erased every trace of the life I built. I showed the picture to the girls. Ruth looked away. Doy's eyes filled with tears. Maxine stared at it hard, then flicked her cigarette into the wind. Time to go public, she said. The interview with Megan Luce took place in a quiet cafe overlooking the Douro River. She carried her recording equipment in a simple backpack, wore no makeup, and sat down with a warmth that felt like a hug. Tell me everything, she said, and I did. I told her about the sacrifices, the long nights working double shifts, the birthdays I made special with pennies and prayers. I told her about the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal that seeped into my bones. I told her how they took me from my home like I was furniture that no longer matched the room. When I finished, Megan took my hand. You are not alone, she said softly. You have no idea how many women write to me with stories like this. But yours is going to open eyes. She aired the podcast a week later. It exploded. Hundreds of thousands of downloads. Messages from women across the country, survivors of the same betrayal. Daughters who regretted their choices. Sons watched their mothers fade into silence. I became a symbol not because I wanted to, but because I had survived. Karen messaged me the next day, "How dare you?" Luke called twice. David left a voicemail full of slurred anger and veiled threats. I deleted them all. But then Emily emailed me. She said she had left home, that she was living with her aunt on her father's side. She said she couldn't look at her mother anymore without hearing my story in her head. She wanted to meet not in Texas, anywhere, she wrote. "Please, I just want to know you again." Maxine warned me not to fall for it. Ruth hesitated. Joy squeezed my hand and said, "Sometimes healing means opening a door. Just one more time." So I chose the place Savannah, Georgia, a city that smells of magnolia and ghosts. I'd always wanted to go. We flew there the next week. Emily was waiting in Forsyth Park, sitting on a bench beneath a moss-draped oak. She stood when she saw me, eyes wide, already shining with tears. She looked like her mother used to before Karen's heart hardened. But there was something else in Emily's face, something raw, searching. "Hi, Grandma," she said. My voice almost failed me. "Hi, sweetheart." We walked for hours. She asked about George, about my childhood, about the day they took me from my home. She told me she'd found the letters by accident digging through Karen's filing cabinet, looking for her birth certificate. She told me she confronted them, and that Karen slapped her. "I couldn't stay after that," she whispered. I looked at her, this young woman, still half girl, and something inside me cracked open. I didn't want to carry rage anymore. I didn't want revenge. I wanted restoration. Not for them, for me. I hugged her so tightly I think I left fingerprints on her soul. When I went back to the girls that night and told them everything, Ruth wiped away a tear. Joy smiled softly. "Maxine just said, well, damn. Guess there's hope for at least one of them." We stayed another week in Savannah. Emily joined us for dinners, for waterfront walks, for late-night stories beneath the stars. It was awkward at first, then beautiful, like learning to breathe again after being underwater for far too long. One night, Emily turned to me and said, "What if we started something? A place for women like you, like us?" I didn't answer right away. But the next morning, over coffee and grits, I said, "We're going to build it." I didn't know how yet, but I had the money. I had a name, the Eleanor Grace Foundation. And I had a granddaughter who was willing to fight with me instead of against me. The past was a wound, yes, but the future. The future was a fire waiting to be lit. The Eleanor Grace Foundation started as an idea scribbled on a diner napkin over pancakes. Off River Street, Emily had drawn little stars around the name, her handwriting still loopy and unsure like a child's. Mine was blocky and firm, shaped by a life that never gave me much room to bend. We didn't know where to begin, but we knew our mission: to protect women like me, mothers, grandmothers, widows, women who had been erased, silenced, used, abandoned by the very people they gave everything to. It wasn't just about money. It was about dignity. Emily took the reins, sharp-minded, a fire in her belly that reminded me of George. She helped register the foundation, build the website, write the landing page copy. She contacted senior advocates and legal advisors. She set up a GoFundMe and it went viral. Hundreds of women sent their stories. Thousands donated with messages like, "This happened to my mom. Thank you for speaking up." I thought I was alone. We started small pilot program in Savannah, a free legal clinic once a week, resource packets mailed to women in nursing homes, support groups on Zoom. Seeing my name on the homepage felt surreal, like I was meeting a version of myself I'd never been allowed to be until now. Meanwhile, the media wouldn't stop calling. Newsweek, CNN, NPR, they all wanted my story. I turned most of them down. I wasn't a spectacle. I wasn't a trend. I was a woman who survived and built something out of the ashes. I didn't want attention. I wanted impact, but I said yes to one interview. Local Savannah News. The reporter, Lorraine, a woman my age with kind eyes, asked gently at the end, "If you could say one thing to the people who put you in that nursing home, what would it be?" I looked at the camera. My voice didn't shake. "I forgive you. But I'll never forget who I became because of you." That clip went everywhere. Karen saw it. After 6 months of silence, she left me a voicemail. I never listened to it. Didn't need to. Whatever she had to say, she'd had decades to say before. That chapter was closed. Luke tried to sue me, claimed I stole the house from under them. The judge dismissed the case in under 10 minutes. I didn't even show up. Maxine Dedan, from what I heard, she obliterated him in her closing statement. David moved out of state. I haven't heard from him since. Fine by me. And Emily, she became my shadow and my star. She traveled with me when we opened our first foundation home in upstate New York. A cozy 5-bedroom house for women displaced by family abuse or neglect. We named it Grace House. When we cut the ribbon, I cried so hard my knees buckled. Ruth had to hold me up. Speaking of Ruth, she met someone. Yes, that Ruth. It took a few days to work out the details. We roped in Ruth, who insisted she once dated a real estate agent and still had his number, though she said he was probably bald and divorced by now. They helped us figure out the facility phone rules and set up a Gmail account. On the community center's public computer, Maxine made the real calls the legal ones, the financial ones. And with every step, I felt like I was waking up from a long, drugged dream. Every time I walked past the nurse's station, I smiled. Every time Karen called with her fake sweet voice to check in, I played the role of the docile mother, grateful, declining visits. But in truth, I was preparing my exit. The sale went fast. Turns out my neighborhood had become a hot spot for tech workers and young families. The buyer offered full asking price within hours of the listing. I didn't even have to meet them. The whole transaction was handled through Maxine's old law contact, Jack Winston, a grumpy but brilliant old man who still owed her a favor from some case years ago. We wired the money into a new account in my name. Dad helped me set it up online using the facility's public Wi-Fi. It wasn't hard. No one suspects little old ladies of plotting revolutions. But the final step was the hardest. I had to disappear before they found out. We picked a Friday night. Most of the staff would be distracted with bingo night in the rec room. And Ruth had bribed one of the younger aides with a bottle of perfume and a pizza to conveniently forget checking in on my room. I had one small suitcase, my passport, a printed itinerary, and 3 one-way plane tickets. I left a single note on my pillow: "Don't look for me. I've gone to find the life you stole from me." Eleanor rode to the airport in silence. The 3 of us crammed into an Uber with broken air conditioning and a driver who didn't ask questions. The terminal lights felt like heaven. I had to bite my lip to keep from crying. Rome, that was our first stop. A place I'd only ever seen in movies, dreamed of quietly. And now it was real. As the plane took off, I looked out the window. The Texas lights sparkled below like the tears I refused to shed. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know how long we'd last or how far we'd go. But I knew this much: they took everything from me. Now I had nothing left to lose. And that made me the most dangerous woman in the world. Rome smelled like fresh bread, old stone, and something sweet I couldn't identify. Maybe freedom, maybe joy, maybe revenge. It was my first time on a plane in over 20 years. My legs cramped, my back ached, and I hadn't slept a wink. But I couldn't stop smiling. Ruth snored the entire flight, her head bobbing like a pigeon. Dee held my hand during takeoff and whispered every prayer she knew, in English and half-remembered Latin. Maxine read a paperback thriller and sipped tomato juice like we were on a cruise, not fugitives on a mission for redemption. We landed in the soft gold of morning, the eternal city stretching out below like a dream you never want to wake from. Cobblestone streets, flower boxes on windows, a man playing violin beside a fountain. My God, I wanted to cry. We checked into a small pension in Trastevere. Nothing fancy, just clean sheets, warm bread in the mornings, and a view of ivy-draped buildings that made you believe in poetry again. The clerk didn't even blink when 4 American women with gray hair and suspiciously few suitcases walked in. I suppose Rome has seen stranger things. That first day, we walked until our feet gave out. Ruth bargained with a street vendor for scarves none of us needed. Dee bought postcards and wrote one to her high school sweetheart who'd passed away 15 years ago. Maxine flirted with a cafe owner named Luca who brought us tiramisu on the house. And me? I stood in front of the Colosseum and let the wind wash over my face. I was nobody's burden, nobody's discarded mother. I was Eleanor Grace Miller, alive. But freedom has a funny way of stirring ghosts. On our 3rd night, I opened my email. I shouldn't have, but curiosity is a wicked little thing. There were 10 messages from Karen. The subject line on the most recent one read, "What have you done?" I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I could hear her voice, already shocked, panicked, furious. The house was gone. The money was gone. And so was I. Maxine found me on the terrace, my laptop in my lap and my glass of wine untouched. She sat beside me, her knee bumping into mine. "You okay?" she asked. "I don't feel bad," I whispered, surprised by my own words. I thought I'd feel guilty. She lit a cigarette even though she wasn't supposed to. "They had a choice, Ellie. They chose themselves. You just chose you back." The next day, we took a train to Florence. I'd always wanted to see the Duomo standing inside that cathedral. Beneath a dome painted with heaven and hell, I thought about George. About the promises we made. I told him I'd take care of the kids no matter what. I never thought I'd need to protect myself from them. That night, I found the letters. We were staying in a tiny rental with peeling wallpaper and a creaky bed. And I'd unpacked my suitcase to find a lost sock. That's when I saw the folder. It had been tucked into a side pocket. I rarely used a manila folder with George's handwriting. There were 6 letters, all addressed to me, dated over a span of 5 years before he died. I read them in silence. sitting on the edge of the bed while the city hummed outside. In them, George talked about the kids, how he'd noticed their entitlement, their manipulation, how he worried about how they treated me when he wasn't around. He wrote about conversations with Luke that chilled him, hints that maybe it's time mom moved out. Even back when I was perfectly healthy, he'd seen the writing on the wall and hadn't known how to stop it. And then came the last letter. It was written just weeks before his heart gave out. Ellie, if you're reading this, I hope to God I was wrong. But if they've turned on you, if you're alone, please remember this: you are worth more than what they've made you believe. Don't let them bury you before your time. Fight back in whatever way you can. You've always been stronger than me. I cried like a baby. I clutched that letter to my chest and rocked on that bed. The pain of it and the love of it washing over me like fire. He knew. Even then, he knew. The next morning, I told the girls everything. Ruth was the first to speak. Then we raise hell, she said. Maxine leaned in. I know a guy who still has contacts in media. We tell your story. All of it. Nodded, eyes wide. We go public. Elder abuse, financial betrayal. You're not the only one, Ellie. You could help others. And just like that, my quiet escape became a mission. We reached out to Jack Winston again, who helped us write the story. He sent it to a journalist friend in New York, Megan Luce, who had a syndicated podcast and a following of older women hungry for truth. Within days, Megan called. She wanted to fly out to meet us. Said she'd been looking for a story like this for years, and while we waited, we traveled Venice, Nice, Lisbon. Everywhere we went, we danced, we laughed. We took pictures that looked like they belonged in a calendar for fierce grandmothers. And deep down, I felt something shifting inside me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was healing. But as I stood on a beach in Portugal, the wind in my hair and the surf licking at my ankles, my phone buzzed a number I didn't recognize. I picked up, expecting a hotel confirmation. Instead, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in years. Grandma. I nearly dropped the phone. It was Emily, my youngest granddaughter. She was crying. I found you, she said. Please don't hang up. My heart stuttered in my chest. Emily, I know what they did. Mom and Uncle Luke, I saw the letters. I saw the podcast. I just want to talk to you, please. And just like that, the ground shifted again. The past wasn't done with me, but neither was the future. It happened on a cruise we all took to Alaska that spring. His name was Dennis Widower, terrible dancer, excellent with chocolate martinis. She said he made her laugh like she hadn't laughed in years. Now they spend half the year in Florida arguing over shuffleboard and pretending they're not madly in love. Doi started a poetry blog that somehow gained thousands of followers. She writes about grief and healing. Every entry ends with a line, just for me, and still Eleanor rises. And Maxine. She's our legal director now. She walks into court like she owns the place. Wears red lipstick every day and calls it her armor. And me? I'm still traveling. Still telling the story. Still fighting. The last thing I did before we closed the year was visit my old house. Not to confront them, not to mourn, just to see. The house had been repainted. The porch redone. New owners lived there now, a young couple with a baby swing hanging out front. I stood across the street, unnoticed, just an old woman in sunglasses and a scarf. I smiled. That house wasn't my home anymore. Home was anywhere I stood in my truth. Anywhere women gathered to lift each other up. Anywhere Eleanor Grace Miller refused to be forgotten. As I walked away, a breeze moved through the street, carrying the scent of roses from somewhere nearby. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, I could almost feel George's hand in mine. We did it. I whispered. We made it, and in that sacred stillness, I knew this wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning. The cruise ship felt like a floating palace, white and gleaming against sapphire water. Gold lettering across the side, celestial dawn. We boarded in Seattle under a canopy of cherry blossoms, petals drifting through the air like a blessing. The whole moment smelled like salt and fresh beginnings. This trip was our reward, our celebration. One last promise fulfilled before the next chapter unfolded. I stood on the upper deck with Ruth, Doi, and Maxine as the ship pulled away from shore. Emily was down in the cabin finishing a virtual meeting for the foundation. She was leading a grant proposal to open 3 more homes in the Midwest. She'd grown into this fierce, radiant version of herself. And I thanked God every day that she found her way back to me and back to herself. Can you believe we're doing this? Doi asked, her hair wrapped in a floral scarf fluttering in the wind. We should have done this 30 years ago, Ruth said, sipping champagne and laughing. But hey, late is better than never, Maxine pointed out toward the horizon. Look at that sky. I want to paint it with a martini in my hand. We all laughed. It was the kind of laughter that feels like real air in your lungs after you've nearly drowned. That night, we dressed in our best and had dinner in the ship's ballroom. The lighting was soft and warm like candlelight. Plush velvet chairs, Silverware heavier than it needed to be. Waiters who smiled like they knew some elegant secret. Halfway through dessert molten chocolate cake with raspberry drizzle, the band started playing. Not loud or flashy, just a soft Ella Fitzgerald tune drifting through the room. And something inside me shifted. I stood. I want to dance, I said. For the first time in years, I want to dance. Maxine raised an eyebrow. Ruth beamed. Doy clapped softly, already reaching for her camera. There was no partner waiting. No person standing on the far end of the ballroom for me to float toward. Just me in a navy dress I'd bought on a whim in Florence. Wearing shoes that pinched and carrying a heart that felt too full, but I walked out there anyway. The band watched me. Other passengers lifted their heads. I closed my eyes and I danced slow and soft, letting the music wrap around me like memory. I danced for every night I cried alone. For every holiday my children forgot. For every woman sitting in a sterile room wondering if her life had already ended. I danced for George. For Emily, for myself. And then, suddenly, arms slipped around me. Strong, steady hands guiding mine. I opened my eyes, Dennis Ruth's gentleman friend smiling gently. He said nothing. He didn't have to. Others joined. Older couples. Solo dancers. A small sea of strangers moving together beneath the chandelier light. We didn't dance like we were young again. We danced like we had finally remembered who we were. The music slowed. The final note lingered. Then came the applause, warm, real, not showy. Back at the table, Emily had joined the girls. She stood, arms open as I walked toward her. You looked like you were flying, she whispered. Voice thick with tears. I said. For the first time in my life. I wasn't dancing for anyone else. Later that night, we stood on the balcony outside our shared suite. The sea stretched endlessly beneath us, moonlight scattered across the water. Then the northern lights began to ripple into view, green and violet waves moving across the dark sky. We watched in silence, breath held like a prayer. Do you ever miss them? Emily asked quietly. My children, she murmured, nodding gently. I inhaled slowly. I miss who I thought they were. I miss the hope. But not the pain. She leaned her head on my shoulder. I'm sorry they hurt you. I kissed the top of her hair. You didn't, and you're helping fix what they broke. That's more than I ever expected. Above us, the sky seemed to dance. The water whispered about new beginnings. And in that moment, I didn't feel like a victim, not even just a survivor. I was Eleanor Grace Miller, mother, grandmother, founder, fighter. And for the first time, I felt like I had finally come home. Not to a place, but to myself. We reached Juneau just as the sun dipped behind the icy peaks, throwing a warm golden glow across the ship's bow. The harbor was quiet, waves tapping gently against the dock as we stepped onto solid ground, bundled up against the cold Alaskan air. Our breath curling like smoke, everyone else wandered off toward the shops, eager for souvenirs and crab legs. But Emily and I chose something different. We booked a small helicopter tour, something neither of us had ever dared to try. Both of us hated heights. But maybe that was exactly why we needed to do it. I want to see the world from the top, I told her. Just once, our pilot, a woman named Sam, had a gravelly voice and the steady calm of someone who'd weathered more storms than she cared to count. She helped us buckle in. As the rotors began to spin, Emily gripped my hand. I couldn't help smiling like a fool. We lifted into the sky and the world below shrank. Juneau became a tiny snow globe town. Mountains unfolded vast, white, wild. Glaciers cracked and shimmered like ancient rivers of glass. When we hovered above one of the largest glaciers, the sun broke through the clouds and turned the ice into something almost sacred. I'd never seen anything so enormous, so untouched. It made me feel small in the best possible way, as if everything I'd endured had been leading to this moment. I'm glad you didn't give up, Emily said softly through the headset. I turned toward her, eyes stinging. I almost did. But then you called. She squeezed my hand. I think you saved me too. We landed on a flat stretch of ice, wrapped in thermal blankets as we stepped out into the crisp silence, the kind that hushes everything. Pain, fear, memory. I pulled out the last letter George ever wrote, the one I'd carried for far too long. And then I let it go. I watched it drift across the ice, weightless, fluttering, spinning, disappearing into the endless white dot. It was time to stop carrying the weight. That night, when we returned to the ship, the others were waiting with champagne. To Eleanor, Ruth toasted, lifting her glass. The fiercest damn woman I've ever met. To Grace, said Di, in every form she comes in. To second chances, Maxine added with a wink. Emily clinked her glass softly to mine. To beginnings, we drank under the stars, wrapped in blankets and love. Laughter echoing across the deck, carried away by the sea. And when I closed my eyes, I dreamed not of the past but of all the mornings still ahead. Not as a forgotten mother, not as a discarded woman, but as Eleanor Grace Miller, reborn, redeemed, finally free. On the final morning of the cruise, fog wrapped the ship in a soft quiet. The kind that makes the world feel paused just long enough to say goodbye. I stood at the rail with a cup of coffee, watching Alaska fade behind us. I thought I'd feel sad, but instead I felt full. Emily joined me, still in pajamas. A wool scarf draped crookedly around her neck. Today feels different, she said. It is. I answered. It's the last day of running, she frowned. Running from what? I turned fully toward her. From grief. From guilt. From everything I thought I failed to be. Her face softened. You didn't fail, Grandma. They did, I smiled. Maybe, but I don't want my life to be defined by what others did to me. I want it to be defined by what I chose to do anyway. After breakfast, the five of us held a small ceremony in the private lounge. No stage, no audience, no speeches. Just stories. We went around the room, each of us sharing the names of women we'd known who had been lost to silence, women forgotten, discarded, or never given the chance to speak. Ruth talked about her sister. Joy read a poem she'd written just the night before. Maxine lit 5 candles, one for each of us, and another for every woman we'd met on our journey who never got to live her life freely. And then I told the story of my life. Not the pain, not the betrayals, but the pieces of myself I'd rediscovered. Planting tomatoes with George. Rocking babies on the porch. Dancing barefoot in the kitchen to old Motown records. My first kiss behind the bleachers. The time I hitchhiked across the state line with my best friend at 17. The Christmas when I surprised the kids with a puppy named Comet. I told them about the fire inside me and how, for years, I let other people pour water over it. But here's the thing about fire, I said. My voice steady. If you protect the spark long enough, it will burn again. We each took our candle and set it afloat in a glass bowl, watching the flames drift and flicker across the water. I looked around at the women who had saved me, who had reminded me of who I was, and then at Emily, my legacy. My future. I'm going home, I said quietly, for faces turned toward me. I'm not going back to Texas, I clarified. But I'm building something permanent. A real place. A headquarters for the foundation. A retreat. A home for any woman who needs one. Maxine grinned. Where? I took a breath. Where it all began, Savannah, they nodded. It made sense. It always had. 6 months later, Grace Haven opened its doors. It was a white, 2-story home with green shutters and a wide wraparound porch that felt like arms ready to embrace whoever stepped onto it. We built it with donations, love, and the unbreakable determination of women who refused to be erased. Emily became the executive director. Ruth and Dennis hosted monthly supper clubs. Joy ran writing workshops. Maxine offered free legal consultations every Friday. And me? Every morning. I sat on that porch with a cup of coffee and watched the world come to us, women arriving with trembling hands and broken stories, then leaving with light in their eyes. Sometimes I told my story. Other times I simply listened. Because I'd learned something powerful. Sometimes the greatest redemption isn't just surviving what they did to you, it's choosing to become someone they never saw coming. Someone stronger, someone free, someone unforgettable. My name is Eleanor Grace Miller, and this is my legacy. Not in buildings, not in money, but in the fire I passed on and the women who now carry it forward. Our first Thanksgiving at Grace Haven felt like a blessing woven into the walls. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, turning the wood floors golden. The air was thick with the smell of cinnamon, roasted turkey, and fresh cornbread. Outside, Savannah's leaves were falling, reds and oranges blanketing the yard. Crunching under every step, wind chimes on the porch whispered memories into the breeze. Inside, there was laughter. Not polite laughter, real, belly-deep laughter. The long dining table donated by a woman whose husband once told her she wasn't fit to host was covered in mismatched plates and silverware, with candles flickering between the serving bowls. Around it sat 22 women. Some wore pearls. Some wore jeans. All wore hope. Grace Haven had only been open 3 months. 3 months, and already we had changed lives. Olivia, who escaped a marriage that had silenced her for 35 years. Harriet, left homeless after her adult son drained her savings and vanished. Rosa, who at 71 finally learned to read and now covered the house in sticky notes with her favor. I knew words, light, soft, beginning. I sat at the head of the table not because I asked to, but because they insisted. They said I was the reason they were there, but looking around, I knew the truth. They were the reason I was whole again. I stood to give a toast, not a speech, just a few words. I raised my glass, apple cider with a splash of bourbon. Exactly the way George used to make it. This year, I began. I didn't lose everything. The room fell silent. I found everything I was missing. I looked toward Ruth and Dennis, sitting side by side, their hands intertwined. At Maxine, carving the turkey like she was presiding over a courtroom. At Die, passing out her homemade apple pie and handing napkins to a girl with tears in her eyes. At Emily, my granddaughter, the fiercest, kindest soul I'd ever known. Standing behind me like a lighthouse, I found myself, I said, my voice trembling. I found family not by blood, but by choice. I found purpose in the ashes of pain. And I want you all to know this isn't just a home for the broken. It's a home for the rising. The room erupted in clinks of glasses, soft weeping, and applause that felt like music made just for us later. As the sun dipped low and the candles flickered, I walked out to the porch. Emily joined me. You never told me what you wished for, she said, nudging my shoulder. What do you mean? That night in Alaska, she said. When you let George's letter go, what did you wish for when you released it? I smiled. I wished, I said, that someday someone would know me for who I really was. And now I wish that someone else will see their own worth before it's too late. She leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder. You're changing the world, Grandma. No, baby, I whispered. We are, and we sat there, 2 generations of fire, watching the stars appear one by one. Like tiny promises written across the sky, winter came softly to Savannah. Unlike the sharp cold I remembered from Texas, here it arrived like a gentle hush, crisp mornings. The scent of pine and clove in the air, soft blankets, slower walks under gray skies. Grace Haven glowed with string lights and quiet miracles. Each room now held a story. One belonged to Clara, who arrived with only a suitcase and a photograph of her late husband. Her children had emptied her bank account and left her in a motel 2 towns over. She didn't speak much at first, but after a few weeks in our garden, her hands found their way back to the earth and to her voice. Another belonged to Naomi, a former nurse who had been placed in assisted living against her will. She taught yoga in the morning now, sitting in a chair, leading breathing exercises for women whose hearts were still learning to trust again. Every time someone new arrived, I saw myself a reflection of who I was that day in the beige nursing home. Suitcase by my feet, faith slipping through my fingers. And each time I welcomed her in, I grew stronger. In January, we held a special gathering, our first night of names. It was Doy's idea and it was beautiful. We each stood in a circle holding a small candle and said the name of a woman we wanted to honor. A mother, a friend, a version of ourselves we'd left behind. When it came to me, I said simply, Eleanor Grace Miller, the one who stayed too quiet for too long. I let that silence stretch, not out of grief, but out of respect. That woman, that version of me, deserved to be remembered too. She kept going when no one thanked her. She loved even when it hurt. And she finally stood up when it mattered most. After the ceremony, Emily found me in the kitchen, tears drying on her cheeks. I want to write a book, she said. About you? About all of this? I laughed. You think people would want to read about a grandma who sold her house out from under her kids and ran off to Italy with a pack of retired rebels? Yes, she said, dead serious. Because they're out there, Grandma. All the women who feel stuck, who think it's too late, who think they're too old to change anything. I want them to know it's never too late. That night, I started jotting notes in a spiral notebook. Memories, lessons, truths no one teaches you until it's nearly too late. I didn't know if it would become a book or a blog or a box of letters for the next generation. But I knew one thing, my voice wasn't going quiet again. February brought unexpected news. The foundation had been nominated for a national award, the Women of Strength Legacy Grant, awarded to initiatives that empower older women with dignity, autonomy, and voice. Maxine read the email aloud in the common room. Ruth screamed. Doy cried. Emily danced me around the coffee table. A week later, the local news returned to film a segment. This time, they didn't just interview me. They interviewed all of us, the women of Grace Haven. Each one shared her story. And the camera captured something no words could fully hold: their power. When the segment aired, we received over 3,000 emails in just 48 hours. 3,000 women asking for help. Daughters trying to help their mothers. Grandmothers asking if there was a Grace Haven near them. We were overwhelmed. And then we were determined. We began to expand. Another home opened in Asheville, one more in Michigan, and a third was planned for Oregon in the fall. And through it all, I kept my morning ritual. Coffee on the porch, a notebook in my lap, a quiet prayer on my lips. Not for justice anymore, but for joy, for the life I never thought I'd get to live. Every so often, I'd see a woman walk up our path for the first time. Shoulders hunched, eyes guarded, and I'd rise to meet her. I'd take her hand and whisper just loud enough for her heart to hear, "You're not lost. You're just getting started." Spring bloomed early that year, as if even the trees and flowers had grown impatient for more life. Grace Haven was covered in blossoms, wisteria curling around the porch railings, daffodils bursting from the garden like little trumpets of hope. Everything smelled fresh, alive, like the world itself had turned a page, and I, Eleanor Grace Miller, was finally ready to write the next chapter. Emily's book idea had taken root. We called it not done yet. She had taken my stories, my letters, and pieces of the women I'd met along the way and turned them into something more beautiful than I ever could have imagined. It wasn't just my memoir, it was a testimony, a declaration. We launched it with a garden party right here at Grace Haven. We invited every woman who had ever passed through our doors and their families. Yes, even some of the children who had once been the reason they came to us in the first place. People do change. Not all, but some. Enough to give you a little more faith in this world. Karen didn't come. David didn't write. Luke sent a bitter message through a lawyer, claiming the book defamed him. We didn't reply. But Emily's parents, her father and stepmother, came, and they brought flowers. Thank you, her father said to me, his voice low, for giving her back to us stronger. That night, after the guests had gone, after the lights were taken down and the cake plates stacked in the sink, I sat on the porch again. Same chair, same mug, same stars above, and I finally let myself remember everything. Not just the pain, but the love too. George, the babies I held, the home I once had, the silence I endured, the fight I found, and the legacy I'd built with bare, battered hands. Maxine joined me, a blanket over her lap. Ruth and Dennis waved good night from their little cottage across the garden. Doy was already inside, working on a new poem about reclaiming your bloom. Maxine nudged my arm. You did it, you know. Did what? I asked. You rewrote the ending. I looked at her, eyes soft with the kind of peace that comes only after the storm. No, I whispered. I just started telling the truth. She chuckled, that gruff, no-nonsense laugh that had carried us through the worst of it. And in that moment, I felt it. I wasn't waiting anymore, not to be chosen, not to be heard, not to be seen. I was here, fully, and for every woman who'd ever felt small, who'd been pushed aside, silenced, or forgotten. I left these words not carved in stone, but in the hearts of everyone we touched. You are not too old. You are not too late. You are not done yet. And neither was I the day the award letter arrived. I was making lemon bars in the kitchen with Emily. Sunlight poured through the windows, warm and syrupy, catching on the flour dust in the air. We were laughing about something ridiculous Ruth had said the day before. The way her dentures had flown halfway across the table during a heated game of Scrabble. And then the mail came. It wasn't fancy, just a cream-colored envelope with our names typed neatly on the front. Eleanor G. Miller and Emily Grace Weston, the Eleanor Grace Foundation. Emily opened it first. Her hands trembled halfway through and she passed it to me without a word. I took it, heart slow and heavy, and read, Congratulations. You have been awarded the Women of Strength Legacy Grant. In recognition of your tireless work empowering women and restoring dignity to those too long forgotten, we honor you with a lifetime endowment to continue and expand your mission. I sank into the nearest chair. Not because of the money, though. Lord knew it would help us build 3 more Grace Havens by year's end. It was the words, we honor you. No one had ever said that to me before. Emily knelt beside me, her face glowing. You did this, she said. You made this world. No, I whispered. We made it together. We held a celebration the following weekend. Not just for the grant, but for the lives we had helped repair. Over 100 women gathered in the garden, some in wheelchairs, some with walkers, some with silver braids and lipstick, some with stories written in the lines around their eyes. There were hugs and reunions, songs sung off-key, and speeches given through tears. They crowned me with a flower wreath. Ruth had made herself a silly thing, really, daisies and ivy. But I wore it like a queen, because for the first time, I understood what royalty really meant. It wasn't about ruling. It was about rising. That night, after the last lantern had been dimmed and the guests had gone to sleep, I sat in my room alone. The award certificate rested on the table beside me. Next to it, George's last letter, the copy I'd printed and framed tucked in the corner with a photo of us from our wedding day, young, bright-eyed, completely unaware of the world to come. And for the first time in my life, I spoke to him out loud. I did it, George. You were right. I was stronger than I ever knew. My voice cracked, but I wasn't alone. A soft knock on the door interrupted me. Emily peeked in. Sorry, she said. Just wanted to say good night. Come sit, I said, patting the bed beside me. She curled up like she did when she was little, her head on my shoulder. I'm proud of you. I told her, I'm proud of you, she whispered. You turned ashes into light. We sat there. No need for more words. The silence between us was full of everything sacred. And when she finally left, I stood at the window looking out over the garden where so many had healed, where I had healed. And I realized something. This wasn't a second chance at life. It was life, the one I had always deserved, with the moon glowing above and spring thick in the air. I closed my eyes and smiled because I had finally come home. Not to a house, but to myself. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.